This is the Chicks of FinTwit, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook. Join me as I highlight female trailblazers and their male allies across the industry as each shares their expertise on a variety of finance topics. Nothing is off limits. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode. All opinions expressed by Caitlin Cook and the Chicks of FinTwit podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of the host or any of their affiliates. This podcast is for informational purposes only, is not investment advice, and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. We are not recommending any securities, nor is this an offer or sale of a security. Hello and welcome to the Chicks of FinTwit podcast, a finance podcast by women for everyone. I am your host, Caitlin Cook, otherwise known as Dead Kate Bounce on Twitter. And today with me, we have a dear virtual friend, Penny Phillips, co-founder and president of Journey Strategic Wealth, a registered investment advisor built for advisors seeking independence in full-fledged practice management support. Prior to founding Journey, Penny ran a consulting and coaching firm called Thrivos Consulting. Very excited to get into that. But first, Penny, welcome to the podcast.
I'm in the pod officially. Thanks for having me.
It was long overdue. I'm glad to have you. But I do want to start. There's so many ways we could go with this conversation, and we will probably go in all of them. But first, maybe just a bit more of a deep dive on your background, because I know a little bit more than most.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk all personal stuff, but I guess I'll have to start with the professional. I am president and co-founder of an RIA. I've spent my entire career in financial services, specifically in practice management consulting for advisors, which is such a specific area to be in. Obviously, before I launched the RIA, I was consulting advisors. I ran a coaching company for several years. Prior to that, I was a consultant. I worked at Envestnet. I've worked at broker dealers. I've worked at a coaching company. And so what I feel, Kate, and I know we've talked about this offline, all of the various experiences I had in my career brought me to ultimately launching a firm that I believe is what advisors are looking for and need. So that's a little bit about me professionally. I'm a New York gal. Anybody who follows me on Twitter knows I'm super proud to be from New York, born and raised. I'm Greek, first generation. My parents are from Greece. And so, yeah, otherwise I'm, just a regular Queens girl trying to make it in this business.
Well, you were definitely making it so far in my eyes, you queen, but maybe starting off on, I know we've talked a bit in the past about your career in consulting, but I'm very curious about your newest venture and just building a business from scratch, what that looks like and what the needs that you saw that drove you to doing what you're doing now at Journey.
Yeah, it was, first of all, it's so much fun, but also obviously the hardest thing I've ever done. And it's funny because I follow so many people on Twitter and social media who are entrepreneurs, and you always hear the good stuff. You usually hear the achievements and the fun, and you don't always hear about how incredibly difficult it is. But so I'll get into some of the peaks and valleys, but I never anticipated launching or starting an RIA. I was always obviously on the quote unquote objective consultant side. I really enjoyed coaching advisors. And by the way, I differentiate between the two. I'm certified as a coach. My background is in consulting, and it's two totally different disciplines. And when I had the old business, we would do a little bit of both depending on what the client needed, obviously. And what I started to notice over the past 2 years was advisors would come to us with a very specific need. The need was usually something around operations, margins, profitability, team. I don't know if I have hired the right person. I don't know how to hire. But the issues, the real issues were always a lot deeper than that. And many of the engagements ended up turning into the advisor realizing that they were building at the wrong firm, or not happy where they currently were, feeling like they had outgrown the infrastructure. By the way, most people know I've done so much of my consulting in the captive insurance BD space. It's where I started my career. And many of my clients work captive agents who became successful advisors. And so I'd been sort of toying with this idea of I need to be able to consult these advisors in a deeper way, because simply talking to them about going independent wasn't enough, because they'd go independent and then recognize that they loved being independent, but they didn't love building or running a business. And so the pandemic really gave me the opportunity to take a step back. I was running a workshop series. I'd been doing workshops for a really long time, and the pandemic halted all of that. So I ran a series called Practice to Enterprise. And when that stopped, I recognized that the consulting business was going to change, probably forever. And so I approached a couple friends of mine in the business. Two of them are guys that I've known for many years, really successful financial advisors. One of them is a good friend of mine and consultant. And we came together and we're like, is now the time to do what we've been wanting to do, which is build an RIA that offers a bunch of things to advisors and doesn't force them to make a choice between lowest cost or highest value. And I could talk about that. For me, the RIA space for the advisor who's only ever been at one firm is very confusing. It's basically you either go completely on your own and launch your own RIA and do everything from scratch, or you basically give up your identity and have to sell your business and join an RIA. And I found that advisors didn't really love either of those in some cases and wanted something different where they can have the balance of independence, but support from a team that was going to grow with them and evolve with them and consult them on an ongoing basis. So basically what we did, we launched in January. We took the consulting and coaching infrastructure that I used at Thrivos with our individual advisor clients, and we made it the foundation of this RIA. So advisors join us, and it's like being part of a big, workshop group. Essentially, we coach them on an ongoing basis, and our mission is to encourage them and help them spend 80% or more of their time every single day with clients or prospects. So far, so good. We just opened an office in San Francisco. We have our office in New Jersey, and we're cranking. We're doing really well.
Business is booming.
Yes,
I'm so glad to hear that. And I do want to back up a bit just on that. I'm just out of curiosity for myself on the coaching versus consulting and your background there, because I don't think I ever realized that there was a difference between the two. And I would love to hear a bit about that.
This is such a good question. Coaching in its fundamental sense, when you're a coach and you're certified as a coach, you first of all have to be objective at all times. So if someone's coming in and telling you what to do, giving you a playbook, saying this is how you segment your clients, they're consulting you, they're not coaching you. Coaches believe that everybody has an inner genius, and it's our job as coach to evoke the genius from the person that we are coaching. And so it sounds a little bit hokey, but it's really the belief that you have the critical thinking skills as a human. You have the ability to solve problems. You simply need somebody to ask you enough evocative, powerful questions to get you to solve your own challenges. What I love about coaching is that the solutions, like what I used to say when I was coaching advisors is, my job is to make myself replaceable. In other words, I don't want you to pay me forever to coach you. I want you to develop the confidence, the skill set, the critical thinking skills to be able to eventually solve leadership challenges on your own. Consulting is totally different. You go in, you know the answers, you're telling the answers, and people want that. So they're two totally different experiences. And I found that our industry uses the terms interchangeably when really they're two totally different things.
Noted. I will be more careful on my word choice now that I know that. But I do want to dig into that a bit more because you've been working with advisors for quite a long time, coaching, consulting, both. What are the biggest trends that you've seen in the industry from, working with advisors throughout the years? What's changed? What stays the same?
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, I mean, I have, I have strong opinions on, what should change and what hasn't changed.
Let her rip.
I'll try to bucket them a little bit. The one thing that became apparent to me very early on, and I started my career at New York Life, traditional old school insurance company. I worked in various divisions. I worked in the asset management arm of New York Life. Then it was Mainstay Investments. You're probably familiar with Mainstay. And I worked in the corporate RIA, which is now called Eagle Strategies. And so I saw like the captive audience, and then I saw the independent advisor building within a big institution. And the one thing that became really clear to me from, honestly, my first year in the business was firms talked a big game about wanting to enact change and wanting to take advantage of, the female wealth. I mean, this is things we've been hearing, right, for the past 10 years, like the females are going to be the breadwinners and people don't want to be sold to, and, all these things that make theoretical sense, but weren't actually willing to change the structural things about the institution that needed to be changed. I'll give you an example. I hear, and when I was consulting, I would hear firms would, and we worked with institutions as well as advisors at Thrivos, and institutions would hire us and they'd say, we need to move up market. We want to attract a higher net worth client. Yet you look at the structure of the organization and they're still paying advisors on an individual rep contract based on the sales of products. And that always struck me as so interesting that firms will pay consultants we weren't getting paid millions of dollars. Somebody was getting paid millions of dollars, not us, but that firms would hire consultants year after year to solve these big, deep challenges and would only make really, really surface changes in the organization. So maybe they'd bring a consultant in to do, a training workshop on how to talk to female investors. And, I was always sort of pounding the table on, you need to do more. You need to change the way advisors are paid. You need to change, you maybe need to take out a layer of leadership at the firm because that's what's sort of causing a lot of issues. And it was those things that firms really weren't willing to change. And I will tell you now, over 10 years, 15 years later, some of that hasn't changed at all. What we've seen, though, is this emergence of a completely different channel in our business, the RIA, obviously an independent channel, that is filling the gap that I think many of those firms weren't able to do on their own. So that's one thing that's always struck me that really hasn't changed, but has caused change in the industry. The other thing I'll say is regardless of what changes from a tech standpoint, obviously the advent of AI and technology has changed the business, it's changed pricing. But the number one issue advisors still come to us for and still talk to me about is human capital. It's the idea of managing people. I got in the business to work with clients. I didn't get in the business to build a team, and I'm struggling. So the struggle between I'm an advisor versus I'm a CEO, HR manager, that to me is still the biggest challenge and one that we haven't done enough to help advisors shift.
Well, lots to cover there. Let's start with the last part of that, with the human capital. How do you uncover talent? How do you seek it out? How do you bring it in? I know that's a loaded question, but how do you even get started tackling that issue? Because it seems like a big one, and I'd assume that's a big part of why it hasn't been solved for many people yet.
Yeah. And I think, it's so from the coaching, like wearing my coaching hat, these are belief systems and mindsets that haven't evolved. Like I talk a lot about, shifting and changing old belief systems. So here's an example, and this is, part of coaching, shifting belief systems. I just said one belief system that so many advisors hang on to is the idea of, I am not a good people manager, right? Like we even say it sometimes to each other, like, gosh, I'm not good at this. Or an advisor will say, I'm not good at managing people. I'm good at, advising. That's a belief system. And if you believe that, then everything you do and everything you say will literally filter through that lens. So the first thing that I would do if I was coaching an advisor is really start to unravel what is in your mind that's preventing you from being a powerful leader versus what is actually fundamentally true about your skill set. So, I'll categorize that as like understanding self. Is the challenge that you're not a good people manager, or is the challenge that you don't have capacity to actually be able to hire a coach or consultant or actually do research on how to build a team? So that's one thing. The other thing I'd say is we are a very task-oriented business. We're very tactical. So we hire by a job description that has activities that we want somebody to do. And what ends up happening is advisors hire talent in very specific roles and never facilitate a culture of, I'll say, self-accountability, personal growth. In other words, we believe that the advisor is the all-knower. We've hired these people to complete very specific tasks, and it's really the advisor's responsibility to develop the talent. And my perspective has always been, no, remember, if we're thinking as a coach and we're thinking that everybody has this genius and this ability to be a strategic thinker, then our job as leader / advisor is to create the environment to allow that to happen. And that's a very different view of building a team than what's traditionally been taught in the business. We've taught advisors hire the cheapest labor possible to do paperwork and then hire more cheap labor to do more paperwork. And what I'll say is, first of all, there's always going to be more paperwork. Second of all, you're not really creating a culture of development where people are actually able to solve problems, develop into different roles, figure things out on their own. And so we have this very sort of hierarchical structure where it's advisor sits at the top, underlings work for advisor, and eventually that starts to fall apart or the firm hits a plateau. And so it's teaching advisors how to think of building a team differently. It's helping advisors recognize it's okay to not want to be the CEO. That's another thing I talk a lot about. And it's why we launched a business that enables advisors to outsource all of team management and compensation to us as experts. Because the truth is, some of them don't want to be managers of people, and that's totally okay. So those are some of the things I tend to talk to advisors about.
I love the comment about not everyone wanting to be a CEO as well, too. I think that's an important distinction. Like, we all have different life professional goals, and not all of those involve climbing to the top, right? Like, there might be comfort in where you are and, happiness and, being totally fine with that, right? So I think we very often get caught up either in this perpetual cycle of assuming that people need to go up, 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 or also, like you said, in complete contrast to that, putting people in these buckets, right? And just assuming that that's where they need to stay, or kind of making a culture where it's assumed that that's where you'll stay.
So you just hit on a really good point. And when I talk about it, I say, we as an industry have defined success for the advisor, meaning anywhere you look, any publication, any practice management thing about advisors always says a couple things. Advisor as CEO, right? Like, there are programs that have been, created, like transition advisor to CEO. We talk about success as who has the most AUM, the billions under management. And we've never really stopped to think about how advisors individually define success. Most advisors got in the business not because they wanted to manage an infrastructure. They got into the business because they liked advising. That's just the truth. I mean, some of them got in the business because they liked selling and making money, but somewhere along the way, they liked advising and liked clients. And so, I think for me, this next phase of my career is about giving that power back to the advisor to say, you know what, CEO doesn't equal success to me. Being an advisor 100% of the time and having impact on the investor is success. And so I want advisors to feel the power of being a CEO without actually having to be a CEO. And I think that is an untapped space in the advisory landscape.
Yeah, I never even thought about a lot of that. So that's a good point there. But backing up on, you being a female CEO of your own company, talking about CEOs, but can we talk a bit backing up at where you even got started in finance? Especially like I always love to ask women this question specifically because honestly, in my opinion, it's not necessarily the most female friendly industry from the outside. And people that I've spoken with have a lot of really interesting stories about what got them into the space to begin with.
Yeah. And I don't have some, sexy story. I mean, I have a really sort of, I would say regular story. I had no connections to this business whatsoever. Literally, like my entire family and close, network. I mean, everybody owned a diner or a restaurant or, some sort of like a laundromat. It was all, I didn't have anybody who went into sort of the corporate route, but I knew I wanted to be a lawyer growing up. I, worked for an attorney all through high school, all through college. I thought that's where I was going. And the God's honest truth is I wanted to make money and I wanted to work on Wall Street. I didn't even know what that meant. I wanted to be a deal maker. And I say this story because it's true. When I was younger, my sister, we'd play careers and she would be a teacher. She's now a teacher, by the way, an award-winning teacher. She's brilliant. And I would be, slamming a table and like throwing papers at people. And in my mind, that was, business. But I knew that I wanted to be a decision maker and have impact. I just didn't know what that meant. And so I was majoring in finance. By the way, if you're majoring in finance and hate it, I did not learn a damn thing. I'm sorry to say that, but all my experience on business, I gained in the business. But I was majoring in finance and I was at a networking event for my school. I was an ambassador, student ambassador, and I was doing this impassioned speech to donors in New York City about, donating to the school. Everybody knows people who know me know I went to a CUNY school in New York City. And someone came up to me afterwards and he said, what's your major? He goes, do you want to go into sales? And it was Cy Sternberg, who's the former CEO of New York Life. And he was like, you need to go into sales and start on a sales desk. And I had no idea what that was. You know that world, Kate. And so that's what I did. I started at, I was 20. I just turned 21 on a sales desk for Mainstay Investments. And that was sort of it. That was my entryway. I learned everything I could. I learned really quickly that speaking was my superpower. And within two or 3 years, I got asked to be part of what ultimately became this sort of consulting division of a corporate RIA. And it was a total fluke, and that I sort of pivoted into that. So sales quickly turned into consulting for me. And then obviously I made a career out of it. But yeah, it was, right place, right time, doing my thing, speaking on stage. And so that's how I got in.
Well, I just laugh because our backgrounds, I also wanted to be a lawyer. I was also, compared to my siblings, that pounding on the table. And I also started my career in asset management sales. So I know that we've talked about this offline, but it makes me laugh every single time.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to highlight, I guess, while you're here too, because we've had this conversation offline. We both did not make careers out of, a sales role per se, but I think that there's so much value to be had out of an experience like that too, regardless of finance or otherwise. I've gained so much insight from that role. And I don't think I realized after leaving it how much of that was transferable. And I'd encourage anyone to take up something like that.
I think it's the best way to start in this business. And I've said that many times. Back then, and people who are listening who've been in the business a while, like wholesalers made a ton of money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, some of them still do, but people were making a ton of money. And I was just like, this is crazy. But I remember very early on, God forgive me for saying this, but I was like, this is not that difficult. Like you don't really need to know a whole lot. And you sort of figure out like, what is your identity and brand's going to be? And I remember thinking, I just cannot imagine year in and year out just doing this and like slinging product it was not for me. But on meeting different advisors and seeing how they constructed their business, that was very fascinating to me. And so I learned a ton. I met them amazing people who I'm still friends with. And everybody, if you're not sure what to do, or you just want to get a foot in the door, I highly recommend working on a sales desk. It's probably the most fun you'll ever have too.
It is. It's crazy. I mean, that's something that hasn't changed throughout the years, is that is always just a crazy, wild desk. But I agree too. And I think that, it's such a throw you into the fire type of deal where it's like, all right, pick up the phones. And like, you're just going to start calling people. And that's even how it was for me. That was like 3 years ago. Like that, some things just don't change. And you're working with advisory teams. You're seeing how advisors manage a portfolio, and they all do that different ways. You're working with different personality types. You're working with research analysts and data teams internally and portfolio managers internally. So anytime I can make a shout out for that, I'll be the first to say that I hated that job after a pretty short amount of time. But like you said, I mean, you're like, oh yeah, anyone could do this. But then once you get into it, I mean, there's just so much to be gleaned from anything within that realm, really.
And you're a lot technically smarter than me. Like I was not a finance student. I was not like a whiz on the products, but it does teach you how to, and I've said this to this day, I cannot state this enough. The most important skill set you can have in this business, and again, we're talking about like my space, right? Retail wealth management, is high EQ, meaning you can read a room, you have self-awareness, you understand how you're being perceived, and just having an ability to very sort of thoughtfully navigate conversations, meaning you have to be 10 steps ahead of people. And this is true in sales in general, but it's also a skill that is worth working on, understanding how to ask questions, how to phrase things, like how to respond, how to, there's always very specific things about myself that I talk about very early on because I know people are going to remember them. And there's just things that you learn. And I've said this, if I ever am going to write a book, the title is going to be, you either got it or you don't, because I believe that too. We say everybody can do that job, but the reality is not everybody is destined to then become an entrepreneur. There's certain skill sets that emerge. And if they emerge, double down on it. If they don't, stay where you're at and make money and have fun.
First of all, I love the title of that book because again, you and I, same page, but I do think that there are a lot of things that can be taught, but I think that it's also to a certain extent, right? Like anyone can do X. Anyone could do a sales job, but how well and at what point is your potential reached on the learning how to sell something like that, right? I think that there is sort of a capacity limit almost on that for people who that doesn't come naturally to. So definitely agree. And I think a lot of people would kind of argue on that, like anything, if you just take the time and, we love the hustle porn type of content where it's like, oh yeah, anything's possible if you just do it. But honestly, it comes back to playing to your strengths. Like at what point is that just fighting against you if you try continuously to do something that you probably aren't meant to do?
So I'm happy you said that because I often, and you too, probably, we get asked on panels all the time, like what, advice do you have? And I'm like, I really don't, because I am a specific type of person and what's worked for me and the moves I've made wouldn't necessarily work for somebody, or it might work better for somebody else. Like I saw this in wholesaling, especially, we really paint this picture to your point of like, everybody can do it. And the truth, and for advisors too. And the truth is that's not true. I mean, it's statistically not true. And second of all, it's just like not true. So I'd much rather see us sort of coach people in any role to your point, play to their strengths, but also find an acceptance in their strengths. Like not everybody has to be this like ballsy hustler to be successful. Like not everybody has that sort of character, and that's also okay. And you can make an amazing career out of yourself being a phenomenal team player. And so it's just, but we're in a profit-driven business, and everybody wants to be the deal maker, I guess, or the person. So It's hard.
Yeah, I think we need to have these conversations more often too, because just the content that people put out there, the successful types, they, what are the similarities in all of these CEOs and successful billionaires? And I just think we try too hard to bucket people. Again, like we talked about this before, but it's really just not necessary. There's so many different pathways to like being successful. So that definitely drives me a little bit crazy sometimes.
Yeah. Also, like, what is success? I mean, I've tweeted this before. I've written it on social media, everything. And I'm actually not a big reader of like other people's success. I'm just like, I read just a lot of weird stuff, but what I just find that everybody's path is different. And I've noticed that anytime I've read or especially like the last couple of years, it's always like, and I've experienced it with prior bosses and stuff. Like, you got to wake up at 4 a.m. and you got to be a runner and you got to be a journaler and you got to be a meditator. And it's just like, dude, I don't want to do any of that stuff and I could still be successful. And so I also think you got to be realistic with what you want. And, people who I know who are really, really, really successful in this business and outside of this business, there is something different about them. There is something there's like a lack of, how do I say this? God, I may get in trouble for this, but I just, nobody we know, but like super, there's like this slight detachment from reality. Like you have, if you're really going to be like hitting it big, you got to be so dedicated to something greater than self. And sometimes there's a bit of like delusion in that. And I just feel like it's okay if you never get there and you're moderately successful doing what you love. So there's no rules. That's the point.
Well, this is all wonderful advice for next generation. We'll be sure to push that on them. But so kind of along that same vein, going back to the space that you work in, working with advisors, seeing that landscape and seeing how it's evolved. When you look at the younger generation of investors, I have to ask, because even in the past year, we've seen just this surge of the retail investor, younger investors getting involved. It's become a lot more social. People are doing a lot more kind of crazy things. And I say crazy because I'm really boring investor, but kind of more outlandish things and trading and all on their own. Is the interest the same inbound for advisors from those younger generations? And how do you see that landscape changing?
Oh, it's so fascinating now to be in this business. And whenever I do talks, I always talk about both the next gen advisor and the next gen investor, because we're seeing these really deep fundamental shifts in thinking, in the way people succeed, the way they motivate themselves. And we're seeing it on both sides of the equation. So the advisor and the client, and it's really fascinating. There's a couple things. Well, first of all, I completely agree with you. And part of it's because of technology, obviously. What we've seen in terms of not just people being self-directed and being able to have access like never before, we're also seeing something else that really emerged very strongly last year, and people are not paying attention to it. I know you are paying attention to it. Your firm is. I brought it up at a conference actually last week, and the panel, I could tell, had not thought about it. We cannot underestimate the power of community and YOLO culture in investing. We saw it. We've seen it this whole last year. But I would say, just with the backdrop of everything going on in the country, everything going on in the world, there's this thing that we didn't account for in our business as professionals. We didn't account for people being able to come together on Reddit, hype each other up, talk to each other, band together, feel like you're sticking it to the man, and making if you're an advisor, you're thinking it's crazy, but is it really crazy? I don't know. The way people think about wealth, what they want, has changed completely. This is not a generation that's thinking, let me save every dollar so at 60 I can go on my first vacation with my spouse, like our parents were probably. This is a generation that's thinking, oh my God, I'm part of something bigger. I have this community. We're tweeting each other. We're in this together. Let's F things up. And that is something that nobody ever accounted for. And know that because I work with advisors all day and they're saying, well, that's not my client. And my client's 60 years old. And but the reality is if you're an advisor who's in their 30s, like I am, right? I'm not an advisor, but my generation, we have 30 years left in this business. The client is going to be that person. And so we have to take into account how technology impacts the way we offer advice, how communities impact the way in which we deliver advice. And then the other thing I'd say that's probably an even bigger trend and shift is, and I say this and advisors get pissed at me, but the responsibility is on the older generation to change, not the younger generation. And here's why I say that. The older generation, older meaning, let's just call it baby boomers, right? They have seen, and older Gen Xers too, they've seen a world pre-internet and a world post and internet age. The younger generation has only ever been in a highly tech-enabled society where your confidence, your ability to make decisions, everything about you is formed by what? People's opinions of you, likes, positive reinforcement. Most advisors who grew up as brokers grew up in a negative reinforcement culture, meaning you suck, you're out. And even to some extent, working on the sales desk, even years ago, I mean, it was tough. Like they would embarrass you. That has gone away. What it's done is it's changed a sales culture. It's changed the way the younger advisor succeeds. It needs to be mentored, grows. It's also changed the way the investor views the advisor. In other words, if you're an advisor who's saying to your client, millennials are so stupid and lazy and they're just sitting there, on Robinhood, guess whose kids are not going to ever be your clients, right? So the society has changed literally like the brain makeup of people, which has in turn changed a lot of things. And technology and social media has literally changed our entire world. And so those are the things that I'm seeing, and I think we're going to have to solve for.
Such a psychological shift for people that have been working for so long, I'm sure, too, right? And I think I would have to assume that consulting, or more so coaching, I guess, right, would have a really big impact on getting people to have the right mindset, because that's not a natural thing to change, especially after building your business for years, decades on an entirely different framework.
And the truth is, it's very difficult to run a profitable business with people who want to do it themselves, let's just call it what it is and not sugarcoat it. Like, that's why the advent of robos, like the advent of digital, what we know about digital advisors is digital advice hasn't replaced the human advisor and never will. But again, it's forced the consumer to make a choice between lowest cost or highest value, meaning I'm doing it myself or I'm getting a concierge experience. Well, getting a concierge experience when you don't have assets to invest is really difficult for an advisor to deliver. Their business literally will not be profitable. So what we've seen is the emergence of subscription fees and advice versus investing. And so advisors need to double down on that in order to build relationships with the younger generation. And the problem is there are advisors stuck at firms right now that literally won't allow them to do that. And that's obviously why we launched an RIA. It's why I'm very passionate about getting advisors out of captive environments where their hands are tied.
Well, hashtag not an ad, but for any advisors looking at this, hoping to go independent, journey strategic wealth, not an ad. But kind of an ad. So this is great. First of all. Second of all, I like to end every podcast with just like something kind of fun. I know that you know what I hope the answers to this will be, or at least part of it. But what do you like to do to decompress? Do you get to decompress? Does your CEO, co-founder, consulting, coaching life take over too much of your time to decompress? And if not, what do you do?
I'm so, It seems like the easiest question, and it's literally not. And what I will say is if you are running a business and starting a business, there is no such thing. And the truth is I live, eat and breathe this industry. I obviously am not consulting or coaching anymore. My full-time running the RIA. I also launched a community a couple of months ago called the Study Group for advisors who just want objective guidance on things like pricing and tech and all that jazz. So I spend like all of my days thinking about the business, but I do watch a lot of reality TV. I play basketball. I love to just veg out, and I'm very close with my family. You know that we all live within like 5 miles of each other. So I'm either watching Real Housewives with my family or playing ball at the park.
Well, the last part of that answers my question, which was going to be, do you or do you not get outside?
Oh, listen, I have to tell you, because of you, I ran twice this weekend, which I've never done, I think, in my life. So,
oh my gosh. We got that. Bobby, did you catch that? We got a recorded endorsement of this. This is huge. We're definitely going to be using this clip as a preview for the pod. Thank you.
By run, I mean walk and then jog in spurts, but I did 4 miles and, I got you to thank for it. And I have your sweatshirt, by the way, which I can't wait to wear when it gets cooler out.
Yes, get outside. And honestly, with the running walk thing, I will say it's just the distance that matters. So always remember that, because I just did the exact same thing the other day, but felt good. Well, on that note, Penny, I want to thank you so much. It's so good to talk to you. Always wanted to interview you. So glad that we got a chance to record one of our conversations. Yes. But in the meantime, before we finish here, where can people follow you?
Oh gosh. Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Thrivos, Thrivos LLC. You can find me on LinkedIn, Penny Phillips, or you can reach out to me via my website, journeyswadvisor.com.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Penny. And thank you to everyone for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you.